Thank you. Artists are often told that they're only empowered to tell their own stories. And of course, there is great power in owning our own narratives. But I'm a portrait photographer and filmmaker. I partner with other people to tell their stories. In an increasingly polarized world, I think it's more important than ever to tell stories collaboratively, across global connections and differences. Through shared storytelling, we learn more about each other and ourselves. For the last 7 years, I've been partnering with African Jewish communities to help amplify their stories. Of course, partnership, by definition, is never unidirectional, and telling stories about African Jewish communities is also partly my own journey. I grew up in an American Jewish family where my parents thought we could shed our ethnic and religious identity. We went to synagogue on holidays, I had a bar mitzvah, but we also had Christmas stockings because, as my father told us, Christmas is an American holiday. So partnering with African Jewish communities has also partly connected me with my own heritage, even as it's expanded mine and hopefully others' ideas of what it means to be Jewish. Too few people know that there are African Jewish communities across sub-Saharan Africa. Some, like the Jewish communities in Ethiopia, or the Lemba Jews of southern Africa, or the Igbo Jewish communities in Nigeria, all have oral traditions that connect them to the lost tribes of Israel. There are also emerging Jewish communities in Kenya and Tanzania, Cote d'Ivoire, Cameroon. The first synagogue just went up in Madagascar. All of these communities are growing in intensity and in size, and they really want to connect with each other and with global Jewish communities. Partnering with me and my team of collaborators and students helps them to build global relationships, which hopefully also return both spiritual and material benefits. I always work in a kind of feedback loop. I get to know people before I bring out my camera, I share pictures as I make them, and I bring films and photographs back to the communities when they're done. This is a portrait of Tigist. Tigist is the only Jewish business owner I know in Gondar, a city in the north of Ethiopia, where there's a synagogue with about 7,000 congregants. The Ethiopian Jews trace their heritage back to the Queen of Sheba and King Solomon, or sometimes to the lost tribe of Dan. About 100,000 members of this community have emigrated to Israel since the 1980s, but some were left behind, and the Jews that still live in Gondar left their village homes over the last few decades to come to the city in hopes of getting permission to make aliyah, to move to Israel, to, as they would say, return to the promised land. This picture is very typical of my work. I use long exposures in very low light to show people when they're most still, when they're contemplative, when they're most inside of themselves. If you look at Tigist's hand, you can see it's still moving a little bit, even though she's standing very still. Here's Tigist just 1 year later, looking very forlorn. The pandemic destroyed the local economy. A civil war in the neighboring region of Tigray took the lives of many family members and friends. Her father died, her husband left her. Most tellingly, she took her name off the list to be considered for emigration, giving up the one dream she'd always had. This is another man in the community, Decherney. Decherney, like several men that I interviewed and photographed, was kidnapped to raise money for the war. For 2 weeks, he begged his captors to take his life as his family raised money to ransom him and free him. Since the end of the war, kidnapping people in this community has just become a local business. Outside the synagogue in Gondar, you can always see kids playing soccer. A few years ago, someone raised money so that they could get matching jerseys and finally compete in the local league. They won every game, and they won 2 of the 3 championship matches. They claimed they would have won the 3rd match, but it was on Shabbat, on the Sabbath, and of course they were going to observe their religion even above soccer. In October 2023, I was in Israel, and I was contacted by the former coach of the soccer team, Getu. Getu had recently emigrated to Israel, and he wanted me to come photograph him for the holiday of Sukkot. He was going to be at the Kotel, the Western Wall, the holiest Jewish site, dancing, singing with the Torah. A few days later, I had to call Getu to see if he and his family were safe. They live in the south of Israel, and I wanted to see if they had survived the Hamas attacks of October 7th. Luckily, Getu and his family were all safe, and I continue to be in touch with him over WhatsApp and many other members of this community. I often say, no project ever ends. The Jewish community in Uganda is neither an ancient community like Ethiopia, nor are they an emerging community. The Abuyudaya Jews of Uganda their story begins in 1919 when Semi Kakengulu, a local ruler, is on a political and spiritual journey. He decides in an anti-colonial move to break with the British, to break with missionaries, to break with the New Testament. He embraces the Old Testament and converts himself to Judaism. Over the next 50 years, he develops a community of several thousand members, and he starts to connect with Jewish communities in other countries. Then in the 1970s, Ugandan dictator Idi Amin outlaws Judaism and forces the community to convert to Islam and Christianity. The members of the community that continue to pray in secret practice in a cave at the bottom of a ravine. This is J.J. Keck, who was a boy at the time. He's now an elder in the community, and he still returns a few times a week to the cave synagogue with his family and friends so that they can sing and pray and connect with the past.
Kati eyo ekanisa gye bagendanga ne beekweka eyo bwe baba baagala okusaba ne bakwegamba okweka okwo kye baakolanga.
Idi Amin was overthrown on the first day of Passover, the Jewish holiday that celebrates Moses leading Jews out of slavery in Egypt, and the Abuyudaya are very quick to connect their own story of near extinction with the Passover story. In the 1980s, JJ and his two brothers decided that they would restart the Jewish community in Uganda. They forcibly took back Nabagoya Hill, which was the traditional home of the Jewish community, and they started a kibbutz, communal living on the Israeli model. They also recorded a Grammy-nominated album of traditional Abuyudaya music. JJ's daughter, Rachel, was born during this period, and she became one of the lead singers in the community. In the short film I made with Rachel about her life, she talks about being a Jewish woman in Uganda. Here she talks about the value of Shabbat, the day of rest, for her.
Shabbat is my favorite Jewish holiday. And I'm thankful that it comes after every 6 days. Because in Uganda or in Africa in general, women work the hardest. We do all the house work. Wash the dishes, sweep the compound, cook, wash clothes, clean the children. So Shabbat is a treat to us. So every Friday, I look forward to Shabbat.
Rachel goes on in the film to talk about how she experienced anti-Semitism growing up in Uganda and how the community overcame its differences with other communities by building inclusive schools with Muslim and Christian neighbors, by starting a farming cooperative with Muslims and Christians. So every time I go back to Uganda, the partnership, the collaborations deepen. Recently, when the Abuyudaya band created new songs, they invited me back to create music videos with them. On On that same trip, I was there because Rachel's daughter, Zahava, had a bat mitzvah, and I got to add Ugandan bat mitzvah photographer to my resume. This is Mira, another girl who was bat mitzvahed at the same time as Rachel's daughter. Her uncle, the chief rabbi of Uganda, Rabbi Gershom Suzomu, led the service. At one point, he turned to his brother, JJ, and he said, who could have imagined when we started the kibbutz movement that our granddaughters would be reading Torah? And today, there's a fourth generation of Abu Yudaya. On that trip, I also returned to the Cave Synagogue with my team and with students and our friends from the Abu Yudaya. We then hiked back up to the synagogue where we showed our film about the Cave Synagogue, really grateful and relieved to hear clapping and thanks. When we left Uganda, we left a camera behind with our translator, Moshe. He's used the camera to create oral histories of elders in the community. That's a really important project that keeps going on. But so are the partnerships, the global partnerships, the cross-cultural partnerships with the Abu Yudaya. When I'm home, I'm still restless in synagogue, but in Gondar in Ethiopia, I'm very happy to sit through the long, endless Purim spiel, telling the story of Queen Esther and the holiday of Purim. I don't plan to be a bar mitzvah photographer in the US, but I'm really privileged to do it in Uganda. When you tell someone else's story, there's a tremendous responsibility to get it right. Not just the facts, but the colors, the details, the beauty in everyday accomplishments and large accomplishments. When you tell your own story, you are the expert, you're the authority. When you tell someone else's story, you enter the impossible but worthy abyss of trying to understand each other, and if you do it well, you both end up better. Thank you.